welcome everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hey, Paul. It's good to be with you once again, and it's also good to be with all our listeners today. If anyone has ever visited our website at thenextchapter.life, you will have found in bold letters our driving mission, which is in search of meaning, adventure, and awe. Now, in retrospect, I realize we have done a lot of exploration into the world of meaning, a bit into adventure, and then just a very little bit on awe. Well, today I want to address that issue in a conversation with our good friend Terry Hershey. Today is all about paying attention and taking time to notice just what is going on around you daily. You may be surprised. Awe comes in regular doses if we take time to see it. That's our subject today. Now, if you're a frequent listener to the show, then you're already familiar with Terry, who is a regular guest. And if you don't know him, Terry Hershey is a prolific writer, conference keynote speaker, renowned landscape architect, and spiritual advisor. So with that, let's bring on Terry Hershey. Yo, Hersh.
Charles.
What's up, my man?
I'm good today.
Oh, are you?
Got to play golf. So
how long has that been?
How long is which part? Being good or playing golf?
Well, I know you're a good golfer, so we don't even talk about that. But
no, I play golf every day, so it was my.
So the snow is so you're clear to go out and play. You don't have weather.
Oh, we have spring is here. It's awesome. Yep.
Is it really? Spring is showing now?
Yeah. So it's in the 50s during the day and.
Yeah, that's comfortable.
Perfect.
Yeah. Terry, I know that the word awe is huge in your personal vocabulary. That whether the word is or the concept is, it's big for you. And in fact, I have probably heard this story a dozen or more times. And you tell one of the most memorable stories about an experience of awe that I have ever heard. And so I'm going to start a bit unusual. Instead of our banter and dialogue, I would love for you to talk about the story on a Vashon Island, Seattle ferry, and a woman who helped you understand the value of awe. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. So for listeners, if the ones who've been to the Pacific Northwest know that there are many islands up here, and for most of them, the only way to get there is large ferries. And so people visit here up in Vancouver, Canadian islands. And for years, I lived on an island called Vashon. And so the ferry went to West Seattle, to the east. So that's where you took the ferry. And I was on the ferry one morning, and ferries, I tell people who've been on a ferry understand it, but ferries are the best way to commute, hands down. So, I love telling this story in Orange County or LA area and ask if they can relate to the 405 or the 5 at 4 in the afternoon, And,
we try to avoid that.
Yeah, in the ferry you just pull your book out and you're just hanging out for the ride. And so this ferry it's just before dawn, and we're heading east towards Seattle. And I'm reading a book, and then there's a woman standing up near the bow of the ship at the window. You could tell sort of by looking at her that she wasn't quite all there, and I know that sounds sort of strange to say, but we do that sometimes with people. We say, oh Lord, they're not quite all there. And because she was shouting, she was pointing and shouting really loud, look, everybody look, look. And so, the rest of us, all the, quote, normal people, we looked at each other and rolled our eyes as if to say, oh, how sad for this woman. I wonder what happened to her. and then ignored her, which is what we do. We ignore people. And but she didn't stop. I went back to my book, but she didn't stop. Look, everybody, look, look, look. And I'm thinking, Lord have mercy. And I've seen Mount Rainier thousands of times, but I figured, what the heck, I'll look. So I put my book down and I look, and the sun, the morning sun, has just crested the Cascade Mountain Range. The Cascade are the mountains east of Seattle. Just crested the range, and so it looks like it's sitting in a saddle between two peaks of the mountain. And then there's still snow on the Cascades. It was that time of year, and
beautiful.
The sun hits the snow and turns the color of a good English beer. And then the sun hits the water, which is the Puget Sound, and literally made a golden pathway to the bow of the ship. So it looked like the boat was traveling a golden path. And to the south of that was Mount Rainier. And anyone who's been up here has seen it, know, 14,400 feet out of nothing. And when you see it, you just say, wow. So it was still backlit. And so it looked like the artist rendered it in charcoal or pen and ink. And to the south of that is Tacoma and Tacoma Harbor. And it's still in sort of evening light. And hanging in the sky is a crescent moon. And the sky is the color of, well, I could only describe it as melancholy blue. And what I can tell you is, I didn't pick my book up again, and I literally had goosebumps watching that whole scene. The thing is, she didn't stop the whole trip. Look!
Oh, really?
Look, everybody look! Everybody look! So what was fun about, we stopped, and of course then had to go down to our cars or walk off the boat. And so we're walking by this woman, and I'm smiling really big, thinking, what's so wonderful on this trip is the one woman or we labeled as, quote, not quite all there, was the one human being who was all there on the boat that morning. And she was the one that invited me to, well, the phrase I've used in my writing from somebody who made it up in the 1700s, is the sacrament of the present moment. And so, now we're back to your word, awe. I encourage people when I do talks, I encourage people sometimes during the day, just whatever you're doing, just stop and say, look, everybody look. Because you never know. You never know what's going to give you goose flesh.
Well, it sounds like, in a sense, she was a prophet. She was...
In a sense, there's no in a sense. She literally was. She's the, Abram Heschel, Rabbi Heschel.
Right.
Yeah, his great line is that in our world we teach children how to measure and how to weigh things. He said, we fail to teach them how to revere and how to sense wonder and awe. In other words, we teach them how to perform by measurements, but we don't teach wonder and awe, which is not a measurement thing. It's simply a to-be thing.
I actually called it a fun thing. It's a rejuvenating thing, that awe, and, we can put beauty in with that.
Right.
Really cannot be measured. I mean, and
no.
If they are measured, they're not measured well, because it is an intuitive sense that resonates with sort of the core of who we are. For instance, I rue the fact that I'm not in nature like what you are, but
right.
I also have found great awe and beauty in contemporary and old buildings. There's something about the architecture where there was a pride in the construction of the building, that the building, there is inherent beauty and there is awe in these buildings. You find them in chapels, but you find them in many modern architectural edifices in our country and in others. And it is a very personal, non-measurable, and it hits intact, sort of in who you are. It has a lot to do with who you are as a person.
The thing about the measurement is, because what you're talking about even with the building, it's still about art, you know. I mean, what I looked at,
yes,
an artist created that.
Yes.
An artist created that. And so, but for me, it's that, because people want to ask, okay, how do I do that? As if there's a book you can read on how to be in awe. But the story I tell about that one, which is important, is it's a story from the Old Testament. So people who heard Bible stuff, they'll remember the story, because remember there's a burning bush, and Moses is by the burning bush, and then he hears a voice coming out of this burning bush, and the voice is God. And so, you know, that's enough to get your attention, freak you out. And so God says to Moses, take your shoes off. You're on holy ground. Take your shoes off. And here's what's interesting about that, Charlie, because I was raised in a conservative Christian church, and I heard that story preached many times, but it was always preached with an angry tone. In other words, why should he take his shoes off? Well, because it's God. I mean, of course you're going to take your shoes off. Bow down. It's God. And I realized none of that was preached accurately in the story. Because let's hear what this says. God said, you're on sacred ground. The ground is sacred, so take your shoes off. What if it's not an assignment? What if it's an invitation? In other words, if that ground is sacred, we don't want anything between you and the ground sacred. So take your shoes off. You know how we put our feet in the sand?
Mm-hmm.
We can't wait to touch the sacred ground.
That's a beautiful explanation. I've never heard that. I've never heard that context for the story. I love that context. That is, it's not an essence of reverence as much as it's a placement, that you are in a place that is special, and to participate in that specialness, not to be separate from it, or just honor it and be reverent and be a part. You are to be part of it,
and you're wholehearted. You're wholly, and you're completely involved. Your senses are involved. All of your senses are involved.
Absolutely. I've got so many disparate notes here, and there's so many things you've led to that I want to talk about, but I'll come back to this story. Just for fun, I checked out a Google definition on awe. And there's all sorts of them. But one I found that I resonated with: awe is an emotion inspired by the sacred or the sublime. Awe is very normal. It's very everyday, and yet there is something sacred to it. There's something set apart, that it's different. It touches different parts of our soul, does it not?
Because you see it in children, but what happens is it's the same with the shoes and Moses. The awe is there, but we end up putting shoes on the feet, and we put restrictor plates on whatever is happening in our spirit or our soul, and so that stuff isn't alive and well in us anymore. And Elizabeth Barrett Browning, her statement about her little poem about the Moses thing was that all of earth is crammed with heaven, and every bush is aflame with God, but only those who see take off their shoes. And it's just about...
Who is that? That is a great poem, Terry. That is, I love that.
Elizabeth Barrett Browning. She's not with us anymore, but I forget what era she wrote in, but that's one of the poems that I remember, because the thing is, what gets in the way is there's a permission that goes on. There's a story that, all these stories come through my head, but it's his father, his little boy comes home from school, in the backpack and art class, and takes the picture out of the son's backpack, and the boy had done a little piece in art class, and it was a little boy in a rainbow, and the boy has got big tears, and there's a puddle of tears, and so the dad's thinking, oh my God, my son is having some significant issues. This can't be good. Something is seriously wrong. And so the father's giving him the quiz, and what's going on, what's happening, and why is the boy crying, and the rainbow. And the little boy said, Dad, because the rainbow was so beautiful, it made me cry.
Yeah. And
That's awe.
that is awe. That is awe, and it's a total release.
No explanation. Yeah, it's a release. There was no explanation.
Right.
He was at home in his skin. He was grounded in the moment, and the tears were. There wasn't a label to attach to any of it.
Let me get theological here a minute, because you're right on a theology that I wanted to get with, and this had to do with that Google definition of awe, that is an inspiration of the sacred or the sublime. Let's talk just for a moment about awe from a divine perspective, and I'm thinking it purely in the creation narrative. And as we have the first 7 days, and I forget how many times, 5 times, I think God said it was good. But what's interesting about that is I just misquoted. God did not say it was good after each day. It was not a pronouncement that, look what I did, this is good. Instead, and I rarely hear it quoted this way, God saw that it was good. He saw that this creation was awesome and beautiful. And if God saw, perhaps God is hoping that we could have those same kind of eyes, and that we could see this is good. Creation is good. Creation is beautiful. And we just have so many duties and so much busyness that we don't have time to catch that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, because one of the things I try to do or encourage people to do, going back to do we weigh and measure, or is it awe and wonder, is what kind of questions do we ask each other? In other words, if I ask you, what did you do or accomplish today, it's fine, we can talk about that, but now we're doing the weigh and measure. But if I asked you, Charlie, in the last 24 hours, what did your heart get or made you smile real big, do you think, Terry,
that most of us could even identify that? Do you think we're so busy by the day-to-day, by the pressure, by, tight schedules, busy calendars? Do you think we can even access what gave you goosebumps today?
Not right away, but it's interesting. The more you ask the question, the more you're aware of it.
There you go.
Because then you're on the lookout. One of my favorite poets, May Sarton, she said, I spend the first 20 minutes of every morning walking my garden looking for miracles. There you go.
I wanted to talk about that as a lifelong gardener and a landscape architect, you have experienced awe in many ways that many of us only catch every now and then. I would love you to tell me about the concept of awe from the perspective of a gardener, and then I would like you to tell me yet another story about your garden pit, your supposed eyesore. So
right.
Talk to me about awe and the life of a gardener, because the life of a gardener is either really anal and measurement oriented, or it's because it can be, if you're producing crops, it becomes very measurement, success oriented, or if you're doing the type of garden you're doing, then it becomes very emotional, sort of otherworldly awe. Tell me about that.
Well, actually, if you turn it into a commercial product, then yeah, it's weighing and measuring. But there are people who actually do that, produce a crop, who do it out of unbelievable awe.
Okay.
Because we talk about I just got back from France,
and I do want to talk about that.
Yeah, but I'm just going to mention really quickly that the gardeners, the wine growers there, they're generations, Charlie. These are passed down through generations, and they've owned this land. So, and in the vines, each vine they call it a tree. They call each grapevine a tree, and terroir is the name. It's the name for the specificity and nature of the place. But it's not just the dirt, because it is the dirt, and how you care for the land. It's the person who does the caring for. In other words, it's what you bring to it. So this is even in a place where, yes, they're going to sell it, and yes, the company's either going to make money or not make money, so there is that. But that specificity of terroir is about that even in the caring for that great tree, that great vine, there's awe. In other words, wonder is a part of their task.
Do you think it's because it's involved, it's synonymous with their soul, that this is...
Oh, there's no doubt about that. Yeah, because it's already deep inside of us. It's there. It exists, which is what our soul is. And so, as long as I have restrictor plates, then I don't see that other stuff. I mean, so the story you asked me about the pit is I had a garden on Vashon Island that I created.
A big garden, like 2 or 3 acres or 4 acres. What was it?
Yeah, it was 5 acres of land. It was 3 acres of garden. Yeah, you've been there a few times, but
yes,
I built that garden, and back part of the garden there's a pond, pretty large pond, and about a 40-yard stream. And so when I first built the garden, which is way back close to the early 2001 or 2, parts of the garden were going in quick and parts weren't. So the part that was going to be the pond was just basically a pit. And because people knew who I was as a gardener, people would come to tour my garden. And so I'd give them a tour, but for whatever we say, we practice what we preach. There was a part of me was thinking, but this pit part doesn't look good, so...
Because it was not, one thing it was not that I noticed as I was reading the story, because it was in your Sabbath moment this week. You tell this story of the pit in your garden and how you were, I don't know if embarrassed by it, but you weren't pleased by it. It turns out from the story that was really your opinion. And that wasn't the actual beauty of what turned out. Tell the story. It's a beautiful story.
It was the word for that is scotoma. Scotoma means selective blindness. Blindness. We see only what we want to see, and so because the garden was supposed to be quote beautiful, and then obviously it couldn't have any flaws to it, and so because this pit had been sort of ignored for that summer. That spring, it was a mud pit, and I wasn't worried about it because I wasn't ready to make it a pond yet. And so Zach, my son, he didn't mind the mud pit. He loved it. But it was ignored, and so this one group, I was touring them around the garden, and there was a younger woman in the tour group, and so she sort of wandered away from the tour group and went over and ended up standing by the pit. So I went over to her because I was going to explain to her, don't worry, this is going to be really beautiful someday. It's going to be a pond, and that's going to be a waterfall, and that's going to be a stream. And then I noticed what she's looking at, because the pit's been ignored. So basically the pit is growing what places grow when they're ignored, which are dandelions. So the entire pit is covered in dandelions, and it's the...
What color?
Flower. Gold, so it's the flower time. So this is before the white puffy ball part, and so it looks like, and then there's gold in the little stream area too, because it was just a mud area too. So it looked like someone had taken, like gold paint and poured it. And this woman, she's going, "This is awesome." She said, "This is the most beautiful creative garden design I've ever seen in my life."
And how did you miss that? You saw that regularly. You have keen eyes. You try to pay attention. How in the world do you think you missed that?
Because we see only what we want to see. It happens every day. We walk by stuff every day. We walk by sunrises and sunsets. We walk by cloud formations. We walk by certain colors in the sky. We walk by bird sounds. Remarkable bird sounds now, especially in the spring. We walk by things that are blooming now, and so we walk by that, and so it's just another invitation. These are just invitations to take your shoes off, and so she was a great teacher to me. That I try to make it a point to notice at least one or two fun, unique things every day that I would have normally walked by. So
this is a conscious choice on your.
Yeah, conscious means literally, because you're talking about paying attention, so it requires consciousness. Take your shoes off, consciousness. Pay attention, be here now. And so, because what happens is if you're conscious and you're aware, you bring yourself to the moment, and now you have the right soil for gratitude and joy. Gratitude and joy grows there.
The right terroir, as you would say.
Yeah, the right terroir, exactly.
Terroir, whatever.
Terroir. Terroir. Terroir.
And I knew how it's spelled, but I just don't know how to say it. Terroir. Okay, you know what I want to do? I want to talk about paying attention. And I think that's, if we look at our woman who was saying, look, this is a woman who is paying attention. And can we tap into that DNA of hers? And I'm going to talk about that after a break. So let's take a quick break and we'll come right back at it. Hi there, this is Charlie Hedges, and you're listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie, and I have my very special guest today, our old friend, Terry Hershey, and we're talking about awe, and just the amazing reality of awe and how life is filled with awe, and yet we miss it regularly, and what Terry and I want to talk in the second half of the show is about, it requires paying attention. It's a conscious effort. It's a conscious effort to do one thing, to pay attention, and to let go of another thing, and that is your busyness and your schedule that takes up all of your time and does not allow you to be human. What do you think about that, Terry?
Yeah, I mean, younger children still don't have that restrictor plate, and I mean, I think of busyness and multitasking as restrictor plates, because we still don't give ourselves the permission just to be playful.
Abraham Heschel, the quote you quoted earlier, is so right on. We are not taught that. We are not taught the importance of catching beauty and being wrapped up in that. We are taught about production, be productive, and also the thing that you talk a lot about is that we are just caught up in the busyness of something that is not about life. We have lost the joy of living by not taking the time to pay attention. So talk to me about what it means to you to pay attention in a world that demands our attention be placed on our productivity and our success.
It's a paradigm shift, and one of the things I do whenever we have workshops or retreats or seminars, we have to begin with shifting the paradigm. In other words, we have to ask different questions. And one of the favorite stories I've always told is about that first grade class who was asked to name the 7 wonders of the world, and so the kids are given the answers. Yeah, Grand Canyon, Niagara Falls, pyramids, and the teachers cheerleading them on. They're doing great. These are first graders. But one little girl doesn't say anything, as this happens in all schools, and teacher says, "What is it?" And she says, "Well, teacher, I don't think I understand the question." She said, "Why?" She said, "Because I don't have any of the right answers." And the teacher said, "Why don't you tell us what you've got, and we'll help you." And the little girl said, "The 7 wonders of the world are to see and to hear and to taste and to touch and to smell and to love and to belong."
I wonder how the teacher responded to that in reality.
I don't know what she did in reality, but see, she was already figured out that she had the wrong answer because the restrictor plate required her to do something different.
Right.
When in fact, she simply was like that lady in the ferry. Look.
I just feel we have so many measurable requirements on us that if we don't achieve this, like your thing on checklists, that I so agree, if we don't achieve the actions on our checklist, then somehow we are less valuable. When pausing, and I want to push your book, The Power of Pause, toward the end of the show, if we are not pausing, we are missing so much of the everydayness and the wonder of life. Back to the creation intent, that's very strong to me, that God saw that it was good. We do not take the time to see that it is good. It gets completely unnoticed, and it's very important that we do that. And give us advice on, so paying attention. Do you think that should be like, even though you're not a big fan, there are many that keep checklists. Do you think that should go on a checklist? I paid attention today.
Well, the checklist should be to give yourself the permission to ask the question periodically through the day. What did I see, hear, taste, touch, and smell? It made me glad to be alive. In other words, give yourself the permission to ask the question rather than the checklist of thinking, okay, I did this one, check. And so because just asking the question invites you to pause, invites you to see it, or even remember it, or relive it, or embrace it, or say a prayer about it, whatever it is. And I marvel at that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I admit, one of the things that it's difficult. I told you that I have this adoration for buildings, but
right.
What about those of us who live rather urban but live in a sea of cement? In Orange County, I live in a sea of cement, and so my awe is really not found in nature. And there's, everybody I read that's into this, nature is a huge part of their awe experience. I have to find awe in people and in circumstances and the way people handle, work with kindness and caring and love. And then every now and then I will see a sunset that will, make me stop off the side of the road or see blooms on a tree. But what about those of us that live in cement cities, Terry? I mean, what do we do about awe?
We already know, and I don't disagree with you that we can see awe and wonder in smiles on faces and in the laughter of children and friends and any number of those kind of things. And the kind words or deeds, we can see that. There's awe. There's no doubt about that. And so I agree with that. But what we do know, we do know that our mental well-being is tied to our connection or disconnection from nature. And we know that places, the cities, that still have better measurements for human mental well-being are cities that have parks. Manhattan would not be Manhattan without Central Park.
Yeah.
So,
but we don't have that many parks in Southern California.
I know, and that part is a very intentional thing, which is fascinating to read because those of us in the garden business, I mean, there are European cities that's one of the primary premises in the continual building of the cities is how many green spaces they have and how many parks they have. That's central to their building. Back in the days when I lived in Orange County, I mean, I spent every Monday down at Laguna Beach at the beach just because I needed that refreshment time,
Did you?
Yeah.
You've done this for quite a while in your life, haven't you?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
I mean, you were the one that turned me on to the monastery, and
Well, I mean, there's a perfect illustration of being reconnected to nature is Valiermo for you.
right.
I mean, yeah, everything about it, even the drive out there,
Right.
then the being there, and just the sense of there's a reconnect. My favorite thing was just when the rabbits hopped in at night, out there outside the places where you stay.
Yeah.
But there is, and so that's why it's for, even though I do still live in nature, there's not a day in our year that we don't have fresh cut flowers somewhere in our house in 2 or 3 vases. In other words, we'll find ways to get nature here.
It's countercultural. We're reared so differently with so many expectations in our middle class values that we don't even see that. You know what I want to talk about before our time runs out? You just took your annual wine trip, and that is just such a fabulous wine trip that you spend a couple weeks in France tasting the finest of wine because you're connected. What types of senses or observations or feeling of awe did you experience on that trip?
The meeting, because we were fortunate to meet winemakers. I mean, in many cases, the owners of the vineyards that go back generations, and just to see, to see that how they care for the land is exquisite. Because of the way it is in the northern Rhone, most of the vineyards, they're not growing on any flat. There's no flat vineyards. They're all severe slopes, which means it's very difficult to farm, and there's no machines. So there's no machinery doing the farming. It's human. You are really close to the earth, and I loved, a couple of the owners, winemakers, a couple of them, having lunch with them in their homes, and you look at their hands and their gardener hands. There's dirt under the fingernails.
Yeah.
And that to me, take off your shoes, take off your gloves. You're grounded here. And we absolutely, and so because the other thing that I smiled at too was that even though as an industry it's unbelievably, quote, productive, but the pace was so different. The pace of life about it was so different.
Yeah, we do have such an immediacy, don't we? That we want results right now.
It was palpable. It was palpable. Because a lot of the wines we tasted, just went out to where they had the barrels and take a little thing out of the barrel and taste it straight from the barrel. It's.
Oh, really? Did you?
Yeah.
Oh my! What a trip! You really did go on a special trip.
Yeah, it was a good trip. Yeah.
I like the idea of pace. Our pace. I've tried to slow my pace down in the last 6 or 7 years, but I'm much busier than I want to be. So let's wrap it up with this because I think you have offered a book that can help us, and you tell me if you think this is the right book, but I think much of what we're talking about might have to do with the ideas that you wrote in your book, The Power of Pause. Do you think that book informs what we're talking about today?
Oh yeah, it's just 52 a chapter for each week, so to speak. Little chapters about invitations to, take your shoes off, slow down.
That we are on holy ground.
Yeah,
and we are on holy ground. I love. Frederick Buechner was the first one that turned me on to that when he talked about his tool shed as a sacred spot. So much of our life is sacred, and yet we are just caught up in rules, caught up in trying to quantify our value, or demonstrate our value. It is what Richard Rohr talks about, our small ego, our small self, that we are just concerned with, the 3 P's: power, possessions, and prestige. We're concerned about those rather than the natural that is already around you, that we can just, if we just grasp it and just rest in it for a moment, if we pause in that for a moment, it is so refreshing, so clarifying, and we come out many times not feeling the repression of busyness and productivity.
Correct. It doesn't take a toll.
Yeah. Well, let's hope this is helpful, and our listeners find a way. I like your idea of asking yourself, instead of a gratitude list, in addition to a gratitude list, what gave you a sense of awe? What gave you goosebumps today? What made you realize that life was more than about productivity and busyness?
Amen.
What did you see on that? Hirsch, it's always good to talk to you, buddy.
Thanks, Charles.
I really value our friendship, and I value your wisdom.
Thank you.
Yeah. I also want to thank our listeners for tuning in to the next chapter with Charlie. And until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.